Welcome to tonight's gentle journey through history, where we explore the lives of European royalty during a time when medicine was primitive and diseases could change the course of nations. Tonight we delve into the stories of 5 monarchs whose lives were profoundly affected by syphilis, a disease that arrived in Europe during the late 15th century and left its mark on royal courts across the continent. These are tales of human frailty, medical mystery, and the way illness shaped the destiny of kingdoms. Let us begin this quiet exploration with compassion and understanding for those who lived in an era when such afflictions were poorly understood and often fatal. The disease we know today as syphilis first appeared in European records around 1495, shortly after Christopher Columbus returned from the New World. Whether it originated in the Americas or was simply a mutation of an existing Old World disease remains a subject of scholarly debate. What we know with certainty is that it spread rapidly through European society, affecting peasants and nobles alike. The royal courts, with their complex webs of political marriages, diplomatic missions, and social gatherings, became particularly vulnerable to this new plague. The disease was mysterious, devastating, and carried with it a social stigma that would follow its victims to their graves. In the palaces and castles of Europe, where power was concentrated and bloodlines were precious, syphilis became known as the Great Imitator for its ability to mimic other diseases. It progressed in stages, beginning with seemingly minor symptoms before advancing to more severe manifestations that could affect the brain, heart, and other vital organs. Royal physicians, working with limited knowledge and primitive treatments, often prescribed remedies that were more harmful than the disease itself. Mercury, the most common treatment, caused terrible side effects, including tooth loss, tremors, and psychological disturbance. The first monarch on our list tonight is King Francis I of France, who reigned from 1515 until his death in 1547. Francis was known for his patronage of the arts, his military campaigns in Italy, and his rivalry with Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. However, behind the grandeur of his court lay a darker reality. Historical evidence suggests that Francis contracted syphilis relatively early in his reign, possibly during his Italian campaigns where the disease was particularly prevalent among soldiers and courtiers. Francis I's symptoms began subtly, as they often did with this disease. Court records from the 1520s mention the king suffering from recurring fevers and skin conditions that puzzled his physician. The French court physician, Jean Fernel, noted in his private writings that the king experienced periods of unusual behavior and physical weakness that seemed to come and go without explanation. These episodes became more frequent as Francis aged, and modern historians studying contemporary medical records believe these symptoms align with the progression of tertiary syphilis. The king's condition affected his military campaigns significantly. During the Battle of Pavia in 1525, where Francis was captured by Charles V's forces, several observers noted that the French king appeared unwell and made uncharacteristic tactical errors. Some historians argue that the cognitive effects of syphilis may have contributed to this devastating defeat that reshaped European politics. Francis spent over a year in captivity, during which time his health reportedly deteriorated further. Upon his return to France, Francis attempted to maintain his image as a Renaissance prince, continuing to patronize artists and architects. However, court observers noted subtle changes in his personality and decision-making. The Venetian ambassador, in a secret dispatch to the Doge, described the king as increasingly prone to sudden rages, followed by periods of melancholy. These mood swings, now recognized as potential symptoms of neurosyphilis, created tension within the French court and affected diplomatic relations. Francis's personal relationships also suffered due to his condition. His marriage to Eleanor of Austria, arranged as part of his release from captivity, was reportedly troubled by his declining health and erratic behavior. Court ladies whispered about the king's appearance, noting that he had begun to lose his hair prematurely, and that his once handsome features had become gaunt and marked by skin lesions that cosmetics could barely conceal. The medical treatments Francis received were typical of the era, and likely hastened his decline. His physicians prescribed regular mercury treatments, administered through ointments and vapor baths. Contemporary accounts describe the king enduring hours in specially constructed chambers filled with mercury vapors, believing this would purge the disease from his body. Instead, these treatments caused mercury poisoning, leading to tremors, memory loss, and further deterioration of his mental faculties. Despite his illness, Francis continued to rule France until his death. His final years were marked by increasing isolation as his symptoms became more pronounced. The once vibrant court of Fontainebleau became subdued, with courtiers speaking in hushed tones about their monarch's condition. Francis's death at age 52 was officially attributed to a fever, but modern medical historians believe that complications from syphilis, combined with mercury poisoning from his treatments, were the true causes of his demise. The second monarch in our exploration is Ivan the Terrible, Tsar of Russia, from 1547 to 1584. Ivan Vasilievich, as he was known, was the first ruler to be crowned Tsar of all Russia, and his reign was marked by both remarkable achievements and terrible cruelty. Modern historians have long debated the causes of Ivan's increasingly erratic and violent behavior, with many pointing to syphilis as a likely contributing factor to his mental deterioration. Ivan's early reign showed promise, with significant territorial expansions and governmental reforms that strengthened the Russian state. However, beginning in the 1560s, contemporaries noted disturbing changes in the Tsar's behavior. Foreign diplomats reported that Ivan had become suspicious of his own nobles, prone to violent outbursts, and increasingly paranoid about conspiracies against his rule. These behavioral changes coincided with the beginning of the Oprichnina, Ivan's reign of terror against the Russian nobility. The physical symptoms that Ivan displayed align closely with what we now know about syphilis. Contemporary accounts describe the Tsar suffering from severe headaches, skin problems, and periods of mental confusion. The English ambassador Giles Fletcher, writing in the 1580s, noted that Ivan's appearance had become frightening, with hair loss, facial lesions, and a tremor in his hands that made it difficult for him to hold objects steady. Ivan's treatment by Russian physicians followed the European model of mercury therapy, though records from the Muscovite court are less detailed than those from Western Europe. Russian chroniclers mention the Tsar undergoing various purification rituals and medical treatments that involved heated chambers and metallic substances, likely mercury-based remedies imported from German physicians who served at the court. The Tsar's violent tendencies reached their peak during the Oprichnina period, when thousands of Russian nobles and their families were executed on Ivan's orders. His own son, Ivan Ivanovich, became a victim of his father's rage when the Tsar struck him with his staff during an argument in 1581, causing injuries that led to the young man's death. This fratricide, whether intentional or accidental, demonstrates the extent to which the disease may have affected Ivan's judgment and self-control. Ivan's later years were marked by attempts at repentance and periods of religious fervor that alternated with continued cruelty. He established a monastery within the Kremlin and spent hours in prayer, seeking forgiveness for his sins. Yet even during these religious periods, he continued to order executions and torture of those he perceived as enemies. This pattern of extreme behavior suggests the neurological effects of advanced syphilis, which can cause dramatic personality changes and loss of moral reasoning. The Tsar's death in 1584, officially attributed to a stroke during a chess game, likely resulted from the cumulative effects of syphilis on his cardiovascular and nervous system. Ivan's physician, the Dutchman Aloysius Baumalius, had fled Russia years earlier reportedly because he feared for his life after witnessing the Tsar's deteriorating condition and violent unpredictability. Our third subject is King Henry VIII of England, perhaps the most famous monarch to suffer from what historians believe was syphilis. Henry's reign from 1509 to 1547 was marked by his 6 marriages, his break with the Roman Catholic Church, and increasingly tyrannical behavior that transformed him from a promising young king into one of history's most feared monarchs. Henry's early reign showed no signs of the illness that would later consume him. He was athletic, intelligent, and charismatic, earning praise from contemporaries as the ideal Renaissance prince. However, beginning in the 1520s, court observers began to notice troubling changes in the king's behavior and health. The first clear indication of illness came around 1524, when Henry developed a leg ulcer that would plague him for the rest of his life. This leg wound, which never properly healed despite the attention of the finest physicians in Europe, is consistent with the skin lesions associated with secondary syphilis. Contemporary accounts describe the ulcer as painful, foul-smelling, and resistant to all treatment. The king's physicians tried everything from herbal poultices to cauterization with hot irons, but nothing provided lasting relief. Henry's personality changes became more pronounced during the 1530s, coinciding with his marriage to Anne Boleyn and his break with Rome. Those who had known him in his youth noted that he had become suspicious, cruel, and given to sudden rages. The jovial king, who had once delighted in music and poetry, transformed into a paranoid tyrant who saw treachery everywhere. The king's treatment regimen included massive doses of mercury, administered by his physician Dr. William Butts. Court records show expenses for large quantities of quicksilver and special chambers for vapor treatment. Henry would spend hours enclosed in rooms filled with mercury fumes, emerging weak and trembling from the toxic effects of the supposed cure. Henry's later marriages were all affected by his declining health. His relationship with Catherine Howard was marked by jealousy and paranoia that led to her execution for adultery. Contemporary observers noted that the king's behavior toward his wives had become increasingly erratic, alternating between obsessive devotion and murderous rage. The king's final years were spent in increasing isolation as his symptoms worsened. His leg wound had become so infected that courtiers could smell it from across a room. He required mechanical assistance to move and had grown enormously fat, possibly due to the hormonal effects of syphilis. His death in 1547 at age 55 was officially attributed to natural causes, but modern medical analysis of contemporary descriptions suggests complications from syphilis and mercury poisoning. Our fourth monarch is Cesare Borgia. Though technically not a king, he ruled as a prince and duke across multiple Italian territories during the height of the Renaissance. Cesare, son of Pope Alexander VI, was known for his military prowess, political cunning, and eventual downfall. His life, immortalized in Machiavelli's The Prince, was cut short by what historians believe was syphilis contracted during his rise to power. Cesare's career began in the church, but he abandoned his cardinal's hat to pursue temporal power as a military commander and ruler. His campaigns across Italy in the early 1500s brought him into contact with soldiers and courtiers from across Europe, providing ample opportunity for disease transmission. Contemporary accounts suggest he contracted syphilis around 1503, during the same period when the disease was devastating the papal court. The symptoms Cesare experienced were particularly severe and disfiguring. Unlike other nobles who could hide their condition behind makeup and elaborate clothing, Cesare's facial lesions became so pronounced that he began wearing a mask in public. This mask, described by contemporaries as both elegant and frightening, became his trademark and added to his reputation as a mysterious and dangerous figure. Cesare's military campaigns suffered as his health declined. His siege of several Italian cities in 1503 and 1504 showed poor planning and execution that contrasted sharply with his earlier tactical brilliance. Soldiers under his command reported that their leader appeared increasingly erratic and prone to fits of rage that seemed to come from nowhere. The treatment Cesare received from Italian physicians was aggressive and probably hastened his decline. Renaissance Italian medicine had embraced mercury therapy enthusiastically, and Cesare underwent extensive treatments that left him weakened and mentally confused. His personal physician, a Spanish doctor named Miguel Corella, later wrote privately about the challenge of treating a patient whose disease seemed to resist all known remedies. Cesare's political alliances began to crumble as his condition became more apparent. Italian nobles who had once sought his friendship began to distance themselves, fearing both contagion and association with his declining fortunes. The Venetian Republic, which had maintained careful diplomatic relations with him, quietly began supporting his enemies. His death in 1507 at the young age of 31 occurred during a minor military engagement in Spain. Contemporary accounts suggest that Cesare, weakened by years of disease and treatment, was easily overwhelmed by enemies who might not have posed a threat to him in his prime. His body, according to witnesses, showed the ravages of advanced syphilis, though official records diplomatically attributed his death to battle wounds. Our final subject is King Christian VII of Denmark and Norway, who ruled from 1766 to 1808. Though his reign was largely nominal due to his mental illness, Christian's case is particularly tragic, because he ascended to the throne as a young man full of promise, only to succumb to what court physicians of the time believed was syphilis, though modern historians debate whether his condition was due to the disease or other mental illness. Christian's reign began with high expectations. He was well educated, spoke several languages, and showed interest in Enlightenment reforms that could have modernized Denmark. However, within a few years of his coronation, courtiers began to notice disturbing changes in the young king's behavior. He became increasingly withdrawn, prone to violent outbursts, and unable to focus on matters of state for extended periods. The Danish court physician, Johann Friedrich Straussy, initially treated Christian for what he believed was syphilis, though Straussy later gained power as the king's advisor and regent due to Christian's increasing incapacity. The treatments involved mercury therapy and isolation, which may have worsened whatever condition the king actually suffered from. Christian's marriage to Caroline Matilda of Great Britain was deeply troubled by his condition. The Queen, sister of King George III of England, found herself married to a man who was increasingly unable to function as either a husband or a ruler. Her later affair with Straussy created a scandal that rocked European courts and ultimately led to Straussy's execution. The king's symptoms included periods of lucidity alternating with episodes of complete mental absence. During his clear periods, Christian would attempt to resume his royal duties, but these intervals became increasingly rare and brief. Court records describe a man who aged rapidly, developing the physical symptoms associated with advanced syphilis, including tremors, difficulty speaking, and skin conditions. Christian's later years were spent in comfortable confinement, with his son Frederick serving as regent. The former king was cared for by devoted servants who protected him from public view as his condition deteriorated. His death in 1808 at age 59 was officially attributed to natural causes, though private correspondence from court physicians suggests that complications from his long illness were the true cause. The impact of syphilis on European royalty extended far beyond these individual cases. The disease affected succession plans, diplomatic marriages, and military campaigns across the continent. Royal courts became increasingly careful about medical examinations before marriages, though the primitive state of medical knowledge made accurate diagnosis nearly impossible. The treatments available to these monarchs, while expensive and administered by the finest physicians of their time, were often more harmful than helpful. Mercury, the primary remedy, caused additional symptoms that were sometimes worse than the original disease. The psychological effects of mercury poisoning included paranoia, aggression, and cognitive decline, which may have contributed to the erratic behavior exhibited by many of these rulers. Court life itself facilitated the spread of syphilis among the nobility. The close quarters of palace life, the complex web of relationships among courtiers, and the frequent diplomatic exchanges between courts all provided opportunities for disease transmission. Royal physicians were often reluctant to diagnose such a stigmatized condition in their monarchs, leading to delayed or inadequate treatment. The secrecy surrounding these royal illnesses had profound historical consequences. Diplomatic relations were affected when foreign ambassadors had to deal with increasingly erratic monarchs whose behavior they couldn't understand. Military campaigns failed when commanders were impaired by disease and toxic treatment. Succession crises emerged when heirs were affected by congenital syphilis passed from their parents. Medical knowledge of syphilis remained primitive throughout most of this period. The disease was often confused with other conditions, and the connection between sexual transmission and the later symptoms was not always understood. This led to treatments that focused on purging the body of corrupt humors, rather than addressing the underlying infection. The social stigma associated with syphilis meant that accurate historical records are often difficult to find. Court physicians wrote in code or euphemisms when describing royal patients, and official death records rarely mentioned the true cause of death. Modern historians must piece together evidence from private correspondence, diplomatic reports, and careful analysis of contemporary medical descriptions. The wives and children of affected monarchs also suffered tremendously. Congenital syphilis caused high rates of infant mortality in royal families, leading to succession crises and dynastic instability. Queens often found themselves married to men whose behavior had been altered by disease, creating personal tragedies that played out on the public stage of European politics. The economic cost of treating royal syphilis was enormous. Courts spent fortunes on physicians, medicines, and special equipment for mercury treatments. The construction of special treatment chambers, the import of expensive remedies, and the employment of multiple doctors created significant drains on royal treasury. Some monarchs attempted to hide their condition through elaborate cosmetics and clothing designed to conceal symptoms. Court painters were sometimes instructed to idealize portraits, hiding the physical ravages of disease. These efforts to maintain royal dignity and authority demonstrate the intersection between personal illness and public image in monarchical systems. The religious implications of syphilis also troubled royal conscience. Many monarchs spent their later years in intense religious devotion, seeking divine forgiveness for the sins they believed had brought their affliction. This spiritual dimension added another layer of suffering to their physical and mental distress. Palace architecture sometimes reflected the needs of diseased monarchs. Special chambers were constructed for mercury treatments. Private apartments were designed to accommodate physical limitations, and discreet passages allowed rulers to move without being seen by courtiers during periods when their symptoms were particularly visible. The international spread of syphilis among royalty was facilitated by the marriage networks that connected European dynasties. A single infected individual could potentially spread the disease across multiple royal houses through strategic marriages and diplomatic relationships. Court ceremonies and protocols had to be adapted to accommodate monarchs whose conditions made traditional royal behavior difficult or impossible. Throne rooms were modified, audiences were shortened, and public appearances were carefully managed to maintain the illusion of royal health and vigor. The development of early modern medicine was influenced by the challenge of treating royal patients with syphilis. Physicians who served at court were motivated to seek new treatments and remedies, though their lack of understanding of the disease's true nature meant that progress was slow and often counterproductive. Some royal courts developed elaborate systems of medical privacy to protect the reputation of their monarchs. Special physicians were sworn to secrecy, medical records were kept in coded language, and access to the royal patient was strictly controlled to limit the number of people who might witness symptoms. The psychological toll of syphilis on royal patients was often as devastating as the physical symptoms. The knowledge that their condition was incurable and socially stigmatized led many monarchs to periods of deep depression and despair that affected their ability to rule effectively. Diplomatic immunity and royal privilege sometimes protected infected monarchs from the social consequences of their disease, but it could not protect them from the medical consequences. The same status that allowed them access to the finest physicians also exposed them to the most extreme and harmful treatments of their era. The children of syphilitic monarchs often suffered from congenital infection, leading to high rates of birth defects, mental retardation, and early death. These tragic outcomes affected royal succession and contributed to the decline of several European dynasties. Court artists and chroniclers walking a careful line between recording historical truth and maintaining royal dignity. Their accounts provide valuable evidence for modern historians, while demonstrating the complex relationship between public image and private reality in monarchical society. The seasonal patterns of royal illness often reflected the progression of syphilis, with symptoms worsening during periods of stress or other illness. Court calendars sometimes had to be adjusted to accommodate the unpredictable nature of the disease's progression. Medical consultations for royal syphilis patients often involved multiple physicians with conflicting theories and treatments. The resulting confusion and disagreement among medical experts sometimes led to even more harmful interventions, as different treatments were tried simultaneously. The invention of new medical instruments and techniques was sometimes driven by the need to treat royal patients discreetly and effectively. Private treatment rooms, specialized equipment, and innovative delivery methods for medicines were all developed in response to the unique challenges of treating monarchs. Royal libraries and archives sometimes contain detailed medical records that provide insight into the understanding and treatment of syphilis in their era. These documents, often written in Latin or coded language, offer valuable evidence for medical historians studying the disease's impact on European society. The political instability caused by syphilis affected monarchs, sometimes led to the rise of powerful advisors, regents, or favorites, who effectively ruled in the name of incapacitated kings. This concentration of power in the hands of non-royal individuals had significant implications for the development of European government structures. International law and diplomatic protocol had to evolve to accommodate rulers whose mental capacity was compromised by disease. Questions of royal competency, the validity of treaties signed by impaired monarchs, and the rights of regents became important legal issues. The development of court medicine, as a specialized field, was partly driven by the challenge of treating royal patients with complex and sensitive conditions like syphilis. Physicians who specialized in royal care developed unique skills and knowledge that influenced broader medical practice. Religious and moral interpretations of syphilis varied across different European courts and cultures. Some viewed it as divine punishment for sexual sins, while others saw it as a medical condition requiring treatment rather than moral judgment. The economic implications of royal illness extended beyond medical costs to include the effects of poor decision-making, failed military campaigns, and diplomatic mistakes made by cognitively impaired monarchs. The true cost of syphilis to European treasuries may never be fully calculated. Marriage negotiations and diplomatic relationships were sometimes affected by rumors or knowledge of royal illness. Potential brides or allies might be warned away from courts known to harbor the disease, affecting international relationships and power balances. The development of quarantine procedures and court hygiene practices was partly motivated by efforts to prevent the spread of syphilis and other diseases within royal households. These early public health measures influenced broader societal approaches to disease prevention. Court entertainment and cultural activities had to be modified to accommodate monarchs whose physical or mental condition made traditional royal pastimes difficult or impossible. The arts patronage of some rulers may have been affected by the cognitive changes associated with their illness. The training of royal physicians included instruction in the discreet treatment of sensitive conditions like syphilis. Medical schools and universities developed specialized curricula to prepare doctors for the unique challenges of court practice. Inheritance laws and succession practices sometimes had to be interpreted in light of rulers whose mental capacity was questionable due to disease. Legal scholars debated the rights of heirs born to impaired monarchs and the validity of royal decisions made during periods of illness. The architectural legacy of syphilis affected monarchs can sometimes be seen in palace designs that accommodated their physical limitations or included specialized medical facilities. These modifications provide physical evidence of the disease's impact on royal life. International medical exchange between courts was facilitated by the shared challenge of treating royal syphilis. Physicians, remedies, and treatment techniques were shared across national boundaries as courts sought effective solutions to a common problem. The social hierarchy within royal courts sometimes reflected the influence of medical advisors who gained power through their role in treating incapacitated monarchs. The elevation of physicians to positions of political influence represents a unique aspect of early modern European governance. Court records and administrative documents sometimes reveal the practical challenges of governing when monarchs were incapacitated by illness. The development of bureaucratic systems to handle routine governance during royal incapacity influenced the evolution of modern government structures. The legacy of syphilis among European royalty extends into the realm of art and literature, where court painters and chroniclers struggled to document their patrons while maintaining diplomatic discretion. Portrait artists developed sophisticated techniques for concealing the physical ravages of disease, using clever lighting, flattering angles, and idealized features to present monarchs in their former glory. These artistic deceptions, while serving immediate political purposes, have complicated modern historians' efforts to understand the true extent of royal illness in various periods. Literary works from the Renaissance and early modern period often contained coded references to royal illness that contemporary readers would have understood but which remained obscure to later generations. Court poets and playwrights, dependent on royal patronage, learned to craft their works in ways that acknowledge their patrons' suffering without explicitly naming their condition. This created a rich tradition of metaphorical and allegorical literature that spoke to the broader human condition while remaining safely abstract. The musical traditions of various European courts were also influenced by the presence of syphilis among their royal patron. Compositions became more melancholic and introspective during periods when monarchs were suffering from advanced symptoms. Court musicians, like other artists, learned to read their patrons' moods and physical conditions, adapting their performances to suit kings who might be experiencing pain, confusion, or emotional disturbance from their illness. Religious art commissioned by syphilitic monarchs often reflected themes of suffering, redemption, and divine mercy that resonated with their personal experience. Chapel decorations, illuminated manuscripts, and religious sculptures from this period frequently emphasized the humanity of Christ's suffering and the possibility of salvation despite human failing. These artistic choices provide insight into the psychological state of rulers grappling with incurable illness and its spiritual implications. The development of palace gardens and outdoor spaces sometimes reflected the therapeutic beliefs of the era regarding fresh air and natural remedies. Elaborate gardens with medicinal plants, healing springs, and spaces designed for quiet contemplation were created, partly in response to the medical needs of royal patients. These landscapes, some of which survive today, represent a tangible connection to the medical practices and beliefs of their time. Courtly dance and ceremonial protocols were gradually modified to accommodate monarchs whose physical condition made traditional royal performances difficult or impossible. The evolution of court etiquette during this period reflects not only changing social norms, but also the practical necessities of maintaining royal dignity while managing the limitations imposed by chronic illness. The role of royal confessors and spiritual advisors became increasingly important as monarchs grappled with the moral and spiritual implications of their condition. These religious figures often served as confidential counselors, helping rulers navigate the complex feelings of guilt, fear, and despair that accompanied their physical suffering. Their private correspondence and memoirs provide valuable insights into the psychological impact of syphilis on royal patients. Diplomatic immunity and royal privilege created unique challenges for foreign physicians called to treat royal patients. These medical experts had to navigate not only the complexities of an poorly understood disease, but also the political sensitivities surrounding royal health. Their success or failure could affect international relations and their own personal safety. The pharmaceutical knowledge of the era was heavily influenced by attempts to treat royal syphilis. Apothecaries and alchemists worked to develop new preparations and delivery methods for mercury and other supposed remedies. Royal patronage of these early pharmaceutical researchers led to innovations that, while often harmful in the context of syphilis treatment, contributed to broader advances in medicinal chemistry. Palace libraries from this period contain extensive collections of medical texts, many annotated by royal physicians treating syphilitic monarchs. These marginalia and notes provide evidence of the medical theories and practices employed in royal treatment, offering insights into both the state of medical knowledge and the specific approaches used for high-status patients. The international marriage market among European royalty became increasingly complicated by the presence of syphilis in various royal lines. Marriage negotiations began to include discreet medical examinations, and diplomatic correspondence reveals careful inquiry worries about the health of potential brides and grooms. These practices represented early attempts at what we might now recognize as genetic counseling or preventive medicine. Court astrologers and fortune-tellers gained influence during this period as desperate monarchs and their families sought supernatural explanations and cures for inexplicable illness. The integration of astrological medicine with conventional treatments created complex therapeutic regimens that combined rational medical practices with mystical beliefs about planetary influences on human health. The economic impact of royal syphilis extended to the luxury trades that served European courts. Suppliers of cosmetics, perfumes, and specialized clothing adapted their products to meet the needs of customers dealing with the physical symptoms of advanced disease. Silk merchants developed fabrics that could conceal skin lesions, while perfumers created stronger scents to mask unpleasant odors associated with infected wounds. Legal scholars of the period grappled with questions of royal competency and the validity of decisions made by cognitively impaired monarchs. The development of legal doctrines regarding mental capacity and the rights of regents was partly driven by the practical necessity of governing kingdoms whose rulers were incapacitated by disease. These legal innovations influenced constitutional development across Europe. The training of royal bodyguards and personal servants evolved to accommodate the special needs of ill monarchs. Guards learned to recognize the signs of medical emergencies, while personal attendants were trained in the discreet management of their master's symptoms. The loyalty and discretion of these servants became crucial factors in maintaining royal dignity and preventing political instability. Military organization and strategy were affected by the presence of syphilis among royal commanders and their noble officers. Battle plans had to account for leaders who might be physically or mentally impaired, leading to changes in command structures and tactical approaches. The development of professional military hierarchies was partly motivated by the need to maintain effective command even when traditional leaders were incapacitated. The evolution of royal portraiture during this period reflects not only artistic trends but also the practical challenges of depicting monarchs whose appearance had been altered by disease. Painters developed new techniques for suggesting health and vigor while working with subjects who may have been physically diminished by illness and toxic treatments. Diplomatic protocol became increasingly complex as courts learned to manage interactions between healthy rulers and those whose condition might be apparent to trained observers. The development of formal diplomatic immunity and the customs governing royal meetings was partly driven by the need to protect the dignity of monarchs whose illness might otherwise compromise their authority. The preservation of royal bloodlines became a more pressing concern as the effects of syphilis on fertility and infant mortality became apparent. Dynasty survival strategies evolved to include multiple marriage alliances, the careful management of succession rights, and increased attention to the health of potential heirs. These practices influenced the political landscape of early modern Europe. Court physicians developed increasingly sophisticated systems of medical privacy to protect their royal patients. The creation of medical ciphers, the use of Latin terminology to obscure diagnoses, and the establishment of professional oaths of secrecy all contributed to a culture of medical confidentiality that influenced the development of modern medical ethics. The role of royal women, including queens and mistresses, became more complex as they navigated relationships with men whose behavior had been altered by disease. These women often served as informal caregivers, political advisors, and guardians of royal secrets, wielding influence that was both personally dangerous and politically significant. Educational reforms in royal households were sometimes motivated by the need to prepare heirs for early assumption of power if their fathers became incapacitated by illness. The development of more systematic approaches to royal education, including training in statecraft and diplomacy, was partly driven by the recognition that traditional lengthy apprenticeships might be cut short by parental illness. The architecture of royal tombs and memorial chapels from this period often reflected the particular spiritual concerns of monarchs who had suffered from syphilis. These monuments, with their emphasis on themes of suffering, redemption, and divine mercy, provide lasting testimony to the personal struggles of rulers who faced both earthly illness and concerns about their eternal fate. International medical cooperation between royal courts increased as physicians shared knowledge about treating syphilis and other royal ailments. This exchange of medical information, conducted through discreet diplomatic channels, contributed to broader advances in medical understanding, while maintaining the secrecy necessary to protect royal reputation. The development of court ceremonial medicine, including public rituals of royal healing and blessing, was partly motivated by the need to demonstrate royal health and divine favor, despite private illness. These ceremonies, while largely symbolic, served important political functions in maintaining public confidence in royal authority. Palace construction during this period increasingly included specialized medical facilities designed for the discreet treatment of royal patients. Private treatment chambers, specialized ventilation systems for mercury therapy, and secure quarters for recovery were integrated into royal architectural plans, creating physical evidence of the impact of syphilis on royal life. The emergence of professional royal biographers and chroniclers was partly driven by the need to create official narratives that could explain royal behavior without revealing embarrassing medical details. These writers developed sophisticated techniques for suggesting the nobility and tragedy of their subjects, while avoiding explicit discussion of stigmatized conditions. Court entertainment evolved to accommodate monarchs whose physical or mental condition made traditional royal pastimes difficult. The development of more sedentary forms of royal recreation, including card games, indoor music performances, and literary salons, reflected both changing cultural preferences and the practical limitations imposed by chronic illness. The international reputation of various European medical schools was influenced by their success in training physicians capable of treating royal syphilis. Universities that produced doctors skilled in discreet and effective treatment of royal patients gained prestige and attracted students from across the continent, contributing to the development of medical education. Religious pilgrimage and the seeking of miraculous cures became more common among syphilitic royalty as conventional medical treatments failed to provide relief. Royal journeys to holy sites, the commissioning of religious art and architecture, and the patronage of religious institutions all increased as monarchs sought divine intervention for their earthly suffering. The development of early modern pharmacy was accelerated by royal patronage of research into new treatments for syphilis. Apothecaries and natural philosophers working under royal patronage made important discoveries about chemical processes and drug preparation, even though their immediate goal of curing syphilis remained elusive. Court fashion evolved to accommodate the needs of royalty, dealing with the physical symptoms of syphilis. Clothing designs that could conceal skin lesions, jewelry that drew attention away from facial deformities, and makeup techniques that could hide discoloration all developed in response to the practical needs of royal patients. The role of royal food tasters and the protocols governing royal dining were expanded to include monitoring of medicinal foods and herbal preparations prescribed for syphilis treatment. The complexity of royal dietary management increased as courts attempted to integrate medical therapy with traditional royal dining customs. Diplomatic marriages became more complex negotiations as courts attempted to balance political advantages against health risks. The development of prenuptial medical examinations and the creation of marriage contracts that addressed potential health issues represented early forms of preventive health planning in royal context. The preservation of royal medical records became a matter of state security, as courts recognized the political sensitivity of information about royal health. The development of secure archival systems and the creation of specialized positions for royal medical secretaries reflected the growing importance of medical privacy in royal administration. International law began to address questions of royal succession when monarchs were incapacitated by illness. The development of legal doctrines regarding regency, the rights of heirs born to impaired parents, and the validity of royal decisions made during periods of mental impairment all evolved partly in response to the practical challenges posed by syphilis. The emergence of royal medical colleges and the professionalization of court medicine was driven partly by the complex challenges of treating royal syphilis. These institutions, while serving immediate practical needs, contributed to broader advances in medical education and the standardization of medical practice. And so we conclude our gentle exploration of these 5 royal lives touched by one of history's most feared diseases. Each of these monarchs faced their affliction in the context of their time, when medical knowledge was limited and social stigma was overwhelming. Their stories remind us of our shared human frailty and the way that illness can alter the course of history itself. In their suffering, we see not only the progression of a disease, but also the evolution of medical understanding and the complex relationship between personal health and public responsibility. As we reflect on these historical figures, we do so with compassion for their struggles and gratitude for the medical advances that have made such tragic endings far less common in our modern world. May their stories serve as both historical lesson and reminder of the preciousness of health and the importance of medical knowledge in protecting not just individuals, but entire society. Rest well, knowing that through understanding the past, we better prepare for the future. And through compassion for those who suffered, we honor the full complexity of human experience across the ages.